In this audiobook, you shall hear the voices of more than 20 unique souls, each crafted to breathe life into the saga. There are no interruptions, no distractions from the tale's dark glory, only the story itself, pure and unbroken. In return for this humble labor, I ask but a small token, a raised thumb, and the press of the hype sigil. Enjoy, and let the echoes of the Imperium guide your listening. A single red emergency lumen flickered above the massive bulkhead door, deep in the belly of the void ship. The steady thrum of the warp drives reverberated through the metal decks, a low heartbeat of the vessel as it drifted blindly through the immaterium. Sanctum Imperator, Enginseer Prime, Galen Korl checked the readings for the third time in the last hour. His mechadendrite tendrils hovered nervously over the control panel, the green glow of rune lights reflecting off the polished brass of his augmetics. Everything was within normal parameters, or so it seemed. Yet an unholy anxiety coiled in his organic gut. He had not slept in 2 days. Every time Galen closed his remaining human eye, the nightmares returned. Visions of writhing shapes and bubbling flesh plagued him whenever he drifted into half-consciousness. "The Omnissiah tests his faithful," he recited silently, trying to banish the images. But the whisper at the back of his mind persisted.
"The Emperor protects,"
he murmured to himself, Vox Grill voice crackling. The litany was automatic, but tonight it gave little comfort. Somehow, beyond logic or calculation, Galen felt a presence watching from the shadows of the Enginarium. The chamber of the Gellar field generator was vast, a cathedral of pipes and conduits. Vapor hissed from pressure valves like the breath of a sleeping giant. The generator's central column loomed up into darkness, its surface etched with wards of protection and studded with purity seals that fluttered in the stale air. Normally, those ancient wards calmed him. But now some were charred black, edges curling as if burned from within. Galen's metal hand shook as he reached toward his cogitator slate to log the anomaly. He hesitated, recalling the nightmare that woke him during his last mandated rest cycle. He had seen those same wards melting away, and something laughing in a voice thick with phlegm. A cold sweat broke out on his flesh shoulder. The logical part of his mind told him it was merely warp travel stress. Souls unprotected by the God Emperor's light often suffered nightmares in the immaterium, but he was not unprotected. He was in the heart of the Gellar field, the very shield that kept the warp's horrors at bay. There should be no intrusion here, no taint. Yet the sense of being watched only grew stronger. Galen turned, shining his shoulder-mounted lumen into the corners of the Enginarium. Steel ribs and cabling cast jagged shadows across the deck. He saw no one. The rest of the engineering crew were either asleep or tending other stations. Only he remained on duty here, alone with the humming machines and the silence. No, not silence. He caught it then. A faint wet sound like a damp rag dragged across the floor, just at the edge of hearing.
"Who goes there?"
Galen's voice rasped, echoing off the metal vaults. He raised the activation lever of his heavy wrench mechadendrite, ready to use it as a weapon if needed. Unauthorized presence in the Gellar field chamber was a grave violation. The sound stopped. There was no answer but the drone of distant engines. Galen's augmented eye cycled through low-light vision. Green-tinted shapes leapt out of the dark, but all were pipes and machinery. He exhaled, the burst of air static tinged through his vox. Perhaps a servo skull patrolling, he reasoned, or a rat in the walls. Minor inconveniences. He turned back to the console, trying to recenter his thoughts on duty. He began a prayer to the Omnissiah, the words coming in a whisper from what remained of his lips.
"Blessed machine, sacred vessel of the Emperor's will, guard our voyage,"
he intoned shakily. His mechanical fingers danced over rune keys, checking the Gellar field integrity readouts. Green across the board. The field was holding. They were safe. The lumen above him flickered again, then steadied. Galen's eye implant registered a slight fluctuation in power output. Some minor instability, perhaps. He tapped a few keys to compensate. The ward-inscribed generator throbbed louder as power rerouted. Suddenly, a panel of warning runes flashed amber. One of the subsidiary Gellar nodes on the lower decks showed a momentary drop in protective field strength.
By the motive force.
Galen cursed softly. He shuffled to another station to recalibrate. The drop was minuscule, perhaps a failing capacitor. But any weakness in the Gellar field could be catastrophic. He toggled the Vox channel.
Adept Heston, report status of node C102.
He voxed to a junior tech 2 levels below. Only static hissed back. Galen's unease deepened. Adept Heston was diligent. He would not ignore a direct call. Perhaps he was performing a manual repair and away from his Vox set. Galen tried another channel.
Bridge, this is Enginseer Korl. Minor fluctuations in Gellar field node. Investigating.
A burst of harsh noise answered, then a fragment of a voice.
Copy. Enginseer. Reading. Interference.
The rest dissolved into a screeching whine that made Galen yank off his headset. Interference? In intra-ship comms? The warp storm outside must be worsening. He glanced at an Auspex dial. Yes, turbulence was spiking. That could explain some power variability. He would have to stabilize it manually. Steeling himself, Galen crossed the enginarium floor towards the maintenance hatch leading to node C102. His robes brushed the metal grill, and the sound made him jumpy. He muttered another litany under his breath, mind cycling through catechisms of calm logic. At the hatch, he tapped the release rune. It slid open with a reluctant groan. A ladder led down into tighter confines. A foul odor wafted up, a cloying sweetness mixed with rot. Galen gagged, both in revulsion and shock that the rebreather implants in his chest hadn't filtered it out. Something was definitely wrong. His flesh heart pounding, Galen descended the ladder. The red emergency lumen above barely penetrated here. He switched his bionic eye to full night vision, casting the world in shades of sickly green. The corridor at the base was cramped, lined with snaking conduits and coolant pipes. He saw a shape on the floor ahead. As he stepped closer, a vermin skittered past his boot, a fat, hairless rat fleeing deeper into the dark. The shape resolved into a man, Adept Heston. The tech lay slumped against a bulkhead.
Heston!
Galen hissed, kneeling. His nostrils flared at the stench. In the green glow of his bionic vision, he saw Heston's face was deathly pale, eyes open and staring at nothing. Blood trickled from the man's nose, ears, and even eyes. Emperor saved them. Galen pressed 2 fingers to the man's neck. No pulse. The flesh was warm, feverish to the touch. Heston's robes were drenched in sweat and other fluids Galen didn't care to name. Could it be a seizure? The warp's influence sometimes caused unprotected psychers to hemorrhage like this. But Heston was no psyker, just a half-bionic laborer. Perhaps some toxic leak. Then Galen noticed Heston's hands. They were clutching a spanner, and the access panel to the Gellar node lay open beside him. The inside looked wrong. Oily residue coated the components, and something organic glistened in the cracks of machinery, like a translucent film of slime. Galen recoiled instinctively from the unnatural sight. There were also scratches, no, symbols, etched into the inside of the panel door, as if by a knife or claw. Twisting, obscene runes that made his augmentic eye glitch as it tried to focus. Panic rising, Galen thumbed the sign of the Aquila across his chest. A reflex of old faith, rarely indulged by a mechanicus tech priest. This was heresy. This was rot and corruption in the heart of the machine. How? How had it come to be? Heston's corpse suddenly twitched. Galen froze. A gurgling sound came from the dead man's throat, and his lips moved as if trying to speak. Impossible. Heston was dead, blood already cooling on the deck. Yet now those lips cracked open, and a wheeze escaped, a whisper that didn't sound like Heston at all.
Free us.
Galen stumbled back as Heston's blind eyes turned towards him, cloudy orbs somehow filled with pleading. Or was it mockery? The Enginseer couldn't tell because a second later, the corpse collapsed again, limp and lifeless as a puppet with its strings cut. Galen's chest heaved. He wanted to radio for help, to scream into the Vox for the captain, the confessor, anyone. But static still filled his ears from the earlier attempt, and a deeper instinct warned him that it might already be too late. He had to close the panel and restore the wards. Yes, focus on the task, contain the damage as protocol demanded. Hands shaking, Galen reached into the opening to reseal the node. The slime clung to his fingertips. It burned cold like dry ice, and his flesh fingers immediately turned numb where it touched. He bit back a yelp and continued working by sheer will, reciting the canticle of preservation.
Holy machine, reject the alien touch. Pure mechanism, deny the corruption.
He gasped out as he reconnected severed wires and slapped a patch over a pulsating, fleshy growth that had invaded a corner of the circuit. The thing squelched under his tool, releasing a puff of noxious gas. His head swam from the fumes. He felt dizzy. For a moment, his augmetic eye faltered and everything went dark. In the darkness, he heard that wet slithering again. Closer now, and a new sound, a whispering chorus like distant coughing laughter echoing through the metal corridors. Galen fumbled for his belt, drawing out a short wrench and a lace cutter. His vision returned in jittery fits, the implant struggling to adjust. The emergency lumen above flickered wildly, casting jumping shadows. From around the bend of the corridor came a shape. Galen squinted. It looked like another crewman. One of the ratings, perhaps. He relaxed a fraction.
Help me,
Galen called softly.
We must contain a leak here. Heston is,
The figure stepped forward into the pulsing red light. Galen's bionic eye focused, and he realized his error. It was not a crewman, at least not anymore. It wore a crew uniform, yes, but the flesh that bulged out from the torn fabric was covered in boils and blackened veins. The head lolled at an unnatural angle, and from the slack mouth spilled a stream of viscous bile. The thing's eyes glowed with a sickly yellow luminescence as they fixed on Galen. Galen staggered backward, almost tripping over Heston's body.
Emperor preserve us,
he breathed. The corrupted crewman lunged, moving with a jerky, twitching speed. Galen raised his lace cutter and fired. A thin beam of red light lanced out, striking the attacker in the chest. The smell of burning, rotten flesh erupted. The creature barely slowed. It slammed into Galen, knocking the tool from his grasp. The Enginseer felt surprisingly strong hands clamp onto his shoulders. Nails, no, claws, bit through his red robes and into the augmetic plating beneath with a horrible screech. Galen howled, more in terror than pain. The face pressing near his was a mask of death, skin sloughing off to reveal muscle and teeth beneath. It rasped out words in a horrible bubbling voice.
He is coming. The door opens.
With a desperate burst of strength, Galen swung his wrench-tipped mechadendrite. The heavy tool cracked into the side of the thing's skull. There was a crunch and a spray of tar-black fluid. The creature toppled off him, momentarily stunned or dead. Galen scrambled up, adrenaline overriding his dizziness. He had to get out. Get to the bridge, warn them that the Gellar field. A thunderous boom rocked the corridor. Galen was thrown against the bulkhead as the floor bucked. The red lumen exploded above, plunging the passage into darkness except for the sickly green of his flickering night vision. The ship groaned as if in agony. Galen's ears filled with a rising wail, like metal under immense stress or a choir screaming. Over that, alarms began to howl, belated warnings of a catastrophic Gellar field failure.
No.
Galen whimpered, dragging himself toward the ladder. His legs felt heavy. Looking down, he saw with horror that a film of organic sludge was spreading from the open node panel, tendrils of it snaking across the deck and up his boots like grasping hands. It pulsed and quivered, alive. He kicked, tearing free of the sticky biomechanical mass with a wet rip. His boots were smoking, the leather eaten away where the filth touched. Clawing his way up the ladder, Galen felt the temperature drop suddenly. The air became thin, crackling with unseen energy. He knew what that meant. The warp was flooding in. As he hoisted himself up into the engine room, he saw a sight that stopped his augmented heart for a beat. The Gellar field generator, the grand device meant to project the Emperor's protection, was changing. The ward's impurity seals affixed to its surface were blazing with green witchfire. The metal around them bulged as if something inside the generator strained to break free. As Galen stared, transfixed, he saw a hand, a gigantic hand, press against the inside of the generator's central column, imprinting from within, stretching the steel as if it were rubber. Fingers of impossible length splayed, each tipped with a curving claw. The metal shrieked and began to tear.
"All hands! Warp breach! All hands!"
A voice blared over the ship-wide Vox, finally cutting through the static with a burst of panic. The captain, or maybe the confessor, Galen couldn't tell, as the announcement dissolved into screams. The Enginseer could only watch in numb horror as the generator shell split open with a sound like a dying grox. A flood of viscous liquid gushed out, drenching the deck. It was as if the ship's very guts had ruptured. The fluid was putrid green and crawling with chunky growths. From the hole in the generator emerged a figure, towering and bloated, a grotesque parody of life. It was shaped vaguely like a man, if a man were swollen to 10 times his mass with disease and corruption. Its skin was cracked and oozing, its face a cyclopean knot of tumorous eyes and a wide grin that split the entire head. It cradled in its arms something limp and red. The flayed body of what might once have been a tech adept, now fused to machinery in a mockery of symbiosis. Galen reeled, bile rising in his throat as the thing stepped free. He recognized the tech adept by the shreds of robes, electro-priest Varlin, who had been tending the generator earlier. Now Varlin was part of it, or part of that. Varlin's cybernetic implants were twisted through the creature's flesh like a horrid tapestry of metal and meat. The man's eyes rolled, somehow still alive or reanimated in unimaginable torment. The giant demon, for what else could it be, tilted its head at Galen. It spoke, and the voice was a gurgling chorus, half a dozen tones overlapping. One of them sounded like Varlin's agonized wail.
The grandfather blesses this vessel. Rejoice, children, for the veil is torn.
Galen screamed. He turned and ran for the enginarium doors and the hallway beyond, ran with all the strength his piston-driven legs could give. Behind him, the demon's laughter boomed, and over it the unmistakable wet thuds and squelches of more abominations slithering into reality. As he fled, Galen glimpsed shapes pulling themselves out of the ruptured generator. Hunched, plague-ridden figures, scampering impish things with multiple arms and blinking eyes. One small, fast creature skittered across the ceiling and let out a shrill giggle as it gave chase.
Emperor, guide me.
Galen sobbed, tears of terror in his organic eye. He darted through the doorway, slamming his fist on the runes to seal it behind him. The thick bulkhead began to lower with torturous slowness. Through the narrowing gap, Galen saw the first demon reach the door, a glistening, fly-headed horror that shrieked and scrabbled on all fours. The bulkhead slammed shut on the creature's outstretched limb, severing it. A spurt of black ichor sprayed through into the corridor where Galen stood. The thing on the other side bellowed in pain or fury. Galen didn't wait. Clutching his side where the earlier attacker had raked him, he stumbled forward. The corridors beyond were dim, emergency lumens casting blood-red light. Klaxons whooped and the Vox units sputtered with fragments of desperate prayers and cries.
Emperor, protect us! The decks 5 through 10 are gone!
Hold them back. Hold. Oh,
Each broken transmission made Galen flinch as he limped onward. His mind raced. Escape pod. Could he reach one? But if the warp had truly flooded the ship, there was nowhere to escape to in the Immaterium. Perhaps the navigator could translate them back to real space. Yes, maybe if they realized the danger, they'd drop out of warp. But the time for that was likely past. Even if the ship translated out now, what emerged would be a charnel hulk. He passed bodies, crewmen torn apart or melted into the floors and walls. Some were still screaming, half fused with metal, hands grasping at him for help as he passed. He did not stop. He dared not. As Galen staggered up a stairwell toward the bridge level, the ship bucked again. He heard distant explosions. Fire and smoke burst from a vent, scorching his robes. Sprinklers activated, raining filthy, brackish water. Through the din, Galen realized he could hear new noises rising above the alarms, a wet chittering and the skittering of countless tiny feet. From the ceiling vents spilled a swarm of chitinous insects. No, not mere insects, but scuttling drone-like creatures with fleshy sacks and mechanical limbs. They poured into the corridor ahead of him, dozens, then hundreds, chittering and squealing. Each looked like a nightmarish fusion of rat, cockroach, and machine, their eyes glowing like embers. Galen froze, heart hammering. The swarm flowed toward him like a tide of living filth. Behind, the bulkhead he had sealed shook with impacts. Larger shapes were trying to batter through. Trapped. Sobbing prayers, Galen drew a small holdout las pistol from within his robes. It was more symbolic than practical. A last resort. He fired into the swarm, popping a few of the scurrying abominations, but it was like spitting into an ocean. Within seconds they were upon him, claws and mandibles slicing into flesh and augmetics alike. He screamed as they swarmed up his legs, chewing wire and meat. Agony lanced from every part of his body as they began to eat him alive. As Galen fell, his last sight was the wave of creatures parting, and through it walking the enormous shadow of the plague demon from the Enginarium. It had forced a long route around, but it was here now in all its horrific majesty. It reached down toward him with one massive, pustule-ridden hand. Galen could not even form words now, only a gurgle of blood from his throat. The demon chuckled, a grotesque parody of a comforting, fatherly laugh, as it lifted the broken Enginseer by the remnants of his robe.
Be not afraid, little cog,
it burbled, mimicking the cant of the Mechanicus as its many eyes regarded Galen.
Grandfather Nurgle accepts all into his embrace.
In the shattered, fading remains of Galen's mind, something snapped. In his final moment, torn between pain and the utter violation of everything he held sacred, Enginseer Prime Galen Korl did the only thing he could. He overloaded the las pistol's power pack. With the last strength in his augmetic arm, he pressed the weapon against the demon's sagging gut and triggered the meltdown sequence. A brilliant flash of light and heat consumed Galen Korl. The corridor shook with the force of the explosion. For an instant, the swarm of creatures shrieked in unison as they were immolated. The plague demon's laugh turned into a roar of surprise and anger as the white-hot blast blew gaping chunks out of its infested flesh. And then, silence, broken only by the distant groan of the tortured ship and the wicked, joyous giggle of other things moving in the darkness. Undeterred, the Sanctum Imperator drifted onward through the warp, its halls now fully claimed by nightmare. Chapter 1. The Derelict, the Ordo transport shuttle. Spectral glided through the void towards the ominously silent hull of the Sanctum Imperator. Minutes earlier, it had dropped out of warp at a safe distance and performed cautious auger scans of the rogue vessel. Now, as they made final approach, interrogator Marcus Graham gazed out a small viewport, heart pounding with anxious anticipation. The sight before him was awe-inspiring and dread-inducing in equal measure. The starship loomed larger by the second, an Emperor-class frigate that should have been bustling with crew and light. Instead, it was dark, running lights extinguished. Its hull was scarred and pitted with meteor strikes and what looked like weapons fire, perhaps from when it translated erratically out of the warp. Sections of the outer plating were melted or twisted as if by intense heat or, worse, by some unholy corruption. Marcus thought he glimpsed strange discolored incrustations on some of the dorsal spires, like lichen or mold creeping across the metal, but it might have just been burnt scoring. A few of the grand, cathedral-like viewports were cracked open to vacuum, tendrils of frozen atmosphere trailing out like the ship's spilled entrails.
No comms, no energy readings beyond minimal emergency power,
Came a tinny voice over the shuttle's vox, likely an adept monitoring the auspex.
Life signs. Indeterminate.
Marcus felt a chill at that. If there were any survivors aboard, the scanners could not detect them. The Sanctum Imperator appeared truly a ghost ship. Marcus drew a breath and double-checked the rebreather unit clipped at his belt. They all wore light void suits or carapace armor with sealed helmets in case of vacuum. The intel had warned that the ship's life support might be failing. More concerning, where an uncontrolled warp incursion was suspected, air itself could be a vector for infection or madness. Each of them had taken purification rites and toxin suppressants before this mission, and still Marcus felt it might not be enough. He glanced around at the others strapped into the shuttle's troop bay. Inquisitor Aurelia Thorne sat quietly across from him, eyes closed as if in meditation or prayer. Sister Amara, a battle sister of the Order of the Iron Rose, softly murmured the Rosarius verses a few seats down. The two Inquisitorial stormtroopers, Corporal Red and Trooper Beck, were exchanging last-minute murmurs, perhaps a bit of gallows humor to steady their nerves. Magos Castor's mechadendrites twitched incessantly as he interfaced with a handheld cogitator, likely reviewing schematics and sensor data for any anomalies. And beside Marcus, sanctioned Psyker, Simeon, 14 Delta, rocked slightly in his harness, eyes squeezed shut, lips moving in the silent recitation of a calming mantra. The tension was palpable. All of them knew this was no routine boarding. A soft shudder through the hull announced their final approach to dock. The Spectral maneuvered to align with one of the Sanctum Imperator's secondary airlocks amidships. Marcus leaned forward to catch another glimpse out the viewport. The shuttle's spotlight swept across a portion of the derelict's nameplate in high Gothic letters, Sanctum Imperator, now marred by scorch marks. He couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness beyond those hull plates was watching them back. Almost there, he thought, stomach knotted with both fear and grim resolve. Interrogator Marcus Graham felt a jolt as the shuttle Spectral locked onto the rogue ship's hull with a clang of mag clamps. Through the small viewport, he took in the gargantuan silhouette of the starship looming against the void. Even with only the faint light of a distant sun and the harsh beam of the shuttle's spot lumen, the vessel's vastness was apparent. It floated dead in space, a silent, unlit behemoth.
Docking sequence complete.
Droned the pilot servitor's voice over the cabin vox.
Hard seal achieved. You may now disembark.
A final round of checks passed between them. Corporal Red tried to muster a grin as she pumped her shotgun.
After you, interrogator,
she said lightly, making a slight bow toward the yawning airlock. Her attempt at humor couldn't quite hide the tightness in her voice. Marcus managed a faint smirk in return, appreciating the levity. Sanctioned Psyker. Simeon suddenly lifted his head, milky eyes wide and unfocused. He whispered,
So much pain. I feel so much pain here.
Voice trembling. A chill silence fell over the shuttle bay at his words. Simeon's face had gone ashen, sweat beading on his brow inside his hood. Marcus felt a prickle on the back of his neck. If the psyker sensed suffering, it was likely an echo of whatever horror transpired aboard.
Shield your mind, Simeon.
Inquisitor Thorne said firmly, slicing through the moment. Her tone was calm but authoritative, a grounding presence.
Remember your wards and mantras. Focus.
The haunted gleam in the psyker's eyes dimmed a fraction. He blinked and inhaled, nodding jerkily as he forced himself back to composure. Sister Amara made the sign of the Aquila over her breastplate.
The Emperor is with us. We shall not fear the dark,
She said, her resonant voice steady. The Battle Sister's conviction was tangible, and Marcus found it contagious. He squared his shoulders. Despite the crackling tension in the confined cabin, they were ready. Each member of the kill team was a seasoned warrior. Whatever lay beyond that airlock, they would meet it together. Marcus exhaled slowly, willing his nerves to steady. This was it. The Emperor knew what awaited them inside that hulk. He rose from his harness seat and joined the others as they prepared themselves. In the dim red glow of the shuttle's ready light, 7 figures moved with practiced efficiency, checking weapons and gear. Inquisitor Aurelia Thorne stood closest to the airlock, clad in a carapace breastplate embossed with the Inquisitorial sigil. She was a tall woman with cropped black hair and a single augmetic eye that glinted red. Despite her relatively slight build, an aura of authority radiated from her. She had been quiet the entire approach, reviewing a data slate of schematics. Now she stowed it and drew her sidearm, a master-crafted bolt pistol. With a grim set to her jaw, she nodded to Marcus. Marcus himself did a final function check on his own weapon, a worn but well-maintained hellgun connected via cable to a power pack on his back. The familiar weight was comforting amid the unknown. Technically, as an interrogator, Marcus outranked everyone present save the Inquisitor, but in truth, he felt more akin to the soldiers. Before Aurelia Thorne recruited him into the Holy Ordos, he'd served as a sergeant in the Cadian 99th, though that was years ago before Cadia fell. He flexed his left hand unconsciously, remembering the feel of a lass rifle and the recoil of countless battles. This mission felt more unsettling than any trench assault he'd endured, though. At least in war, one faced known enemies. Here, he wasn't sure what they'd find. Behind him, Sister Amara finished a quiet prayer while loading shells into her Godwin Diaz pattern bolter. Her power armor, painted matte black with red trim, hummed softly as it fully powered up. She had removed her helmet for the prayer, revealing a youthful yet stern face, shaved bald except for a top knot of white hair. Amara's eyes were closed and lips moved silently. Marcus caught the ending words. For the Emperor is our light and our shield. The Emperor protects. She kissed an Aquila pendant and placed her helmet on. The mag seals locked with a hiss. In her armor, the Battle Sister looked like a statuesque avatar of war, a stark contrast to the murk and decay likely awaiting inside. By the Sister's side stood a hunched figure draped in tattered green robes, Magos Castor, the Adeptus Mechanicus tech priest assigned to assist. Spidery, bionic limbs protruded from his back, each holding a different tool. A short-barreled arc pistol was clutched in one augmented hand. His face was mostly obscured by a rebreather mask and an array of ocular lenses. Those lenses whirred and refocused, likely cycling through spectrums as he scanned the airlock seals. Castor's one visible organic hand twitched in what Marcus recognized as a sign of agitation or excitement. The Magos had been eager to explore the mysteries of this ghost ship ever since they'd gotten the assignment. Too eager, perhaps, Marcus thought. Curiosity could be fatal. Standing a bit apart was Psyker Simeon, frail in his threadbare Imperial Guard uniform. A metal collar encircled his neck, the Psychne limiter that helped him control his powers. Simeon's eyes were an unsettling milky white, blinded by the horrors he'd seen in the warp, though somehow he navigated with ease using his witch sight. He clutched a wooden staff inscribed with protective hexagrams in one hand. His other hand hovered near a holstered las pistol that Marcus doubted he could use effectively. Simeon was muttering under his breath, a litany to focus his mind. Though others sometimes shunned the psyker, Marcus felt a pang of sympathy. Simeon looked terrified, sweat beading on his brow despite the chill in the shuttle. If there was any immaterial taint beyond that airlock, Simeon would likely sense it first. A dubious blessing. Finally, at the rear, the two Inquisitorial stormtroopers made final checks on each other's gear. Corporal Red, a stout woman with a scar running across her cheek, racked the slide of her combat shotgun and nodded to her comrade, Trooper Beck, a lanky young man cradling a flamer unit. They both wore light carapace armor painted in matte black, and rebreather masks hung at their necks. Marcus knew little about them personally. They'd been assigned only days before departure, but they moved with the confident discipline of hardened troopers. Their presence was welcome, some extra firepower in case things got ugly in there. Things will get ugly, Marcus corrected himself. Optimism had no place here, better to expect the worst. He stepped forward to join Inquisitor Thorn by the hatch. A few taps on the control panel, and a green rune lit up, indicating pressurization. A dull clang sounded through the shuttle as the airlock to the derelict made a solid seal. Aurelia Thorne's voice cut through the quiet, calm, and authoritative.
Our Vox network is live. Check channels,
she said. Each member gave an affirmative as they toggled their microbeads. Marcus heard the soft crackle in his ear, and a heartbeat later the linked network connected, indicated by a tiny rune on his helmet display.
Comms, check,
Marcus confirmed softly.
Mission parameters, final review,
Thorne said, looking around at them.
The Sanctum Imperator disappeared, translating into the warp 8 standard months ago. It re-emerged from the Immaterium 3 days ago, on the edge of the Carthago system, completely unresponsive. No life signs, no comms. The naval patrol that found it observed severe hull damage. They wisely kept their distance and signaled the Ordo. That is us.
She let that sink in a moment. Even though they'd all been briefed, hearing it aloud here, on the cusp of entering, added weight to the words.
Our objectives,
she continued,
are to investigate the vessel, secure any evidence of what occurred, and eliminate any threat that may remain on board. If, as we suspect, this involves warp corruption or heretical taint, we will cleanse it with fire.
She gave a nod to Trooper Beck, who patted the promethium tank of his flamer.
Extraction point is our shuttle,
Thorne went on.
If possible, we return here after accomplishing objectives, or if the situation becomes untenable. Failing that, we identify an alternate extraction and call for retrieval by our courier ship in orbit.
Marcus reminded himself that a light cruiser was indeed holding position at a safe distance, under strict orders to destroy this ship should the Inquisitor give the word, or if no word came at all within a certain window. It was both comforting and chilling. They had support, yes, but also a ticking clock, and the possibility of being on board when the Sanctum Imperator was scoured to atoms by cyclonic torpedoes. Best not to linger too long.
Questions?
Thorne asked crisply. No one spoke. They had their orders. The Inquisitor reached into her coat and retrieved a small object, a silver medallion emblazoned with the Imperial Aquila and the Inquisitorial seal on the reverse. She pressed it to her lips briefly in a private benediction, then tucked it away.
May the Emperor guide our steps,
she said quietly, echoing a sentiment all of them could agree on. Sister Amara responded solemnly.
And light our path through the darkness.
Magos Castor made a clicking sound that might have been an affirmational binary cant, and Simeon bowed his head. Marcus readied his Hellgun and took position by the inner airlock door. On Thorn's hand signal, he hit the door release. With a hydraulic hiss and a clank of gears, the shuttle's forward hatch cycled open, revealing the Sanctum Imperator's interior airlock beyond. A gust of stale, cold air washed over them. Even through the filter of his helmet's rebreather, Marcus could smell it. An underlying charnel odor that stirred unpleasant memories of mass graves and plague pits from battlefields long past. Beck muttered a curse, and Marcus couldn't blame him. The residual gravity and atmospheric pressure indicated that life support had not completely failed, but Marcus's suit auspex registered temperatures near freezing. A fine rime of frost crackled underfoot as they stepped across the threshold. Their breath vapor coiled inside their helmet visors as warm air met the chill. It was like walking into a long-abandoned crypt. The airlock chamber beyond was dark, lit only by the beams of their helmet lamps and the shuttle lights behind them. The team filed in, weapons raised, scanning every angle. Their footsteps clanked on the metal floor. Each sound seemed unnaturally loud in the tomb-like silence of the derelict. Magos Castor extended a mechadendrite to a console by the interior hatch.
"Attempting to cycle inner hatch,"
he reported, voice tinny through his Vox grill.
"Power low but present. Emergency reserves, perhaps."
After a few sparks and a groan of protest, the inner door began to grind open. Marcus squinted into darkness as the heavy bulkhead slid aside. He toggled his visor to low-light mode. The corridor beyond appeared in washes of grainy gray and black. The beam of Sister Amara's lamp pack swept ahead, illuminating drifting motes of dust, or maybe ash, in the air.
Emperor, preserve us,
she whispered at what the light revealed. Marcus saw it too. The corridor walls were streaked with something dark and reddish-brown. Blood, long-dried, and bizarre symbols drawn in it here and there. It was smeared in handprints and slashes, as if a great violence had occurred here. There were lass-burn scorch marks and deeper craters from what might have been grenades or bolt blasts. Scattered on the floor were spent shell casings, a discarded lass rifle, and bones. A rib cage lay against the wall, picked clean. Further down, a human skull stared back at them, half crushed. Corporal Red sucked in a breath. Trooper Beck muttered,
"Throne!"
Thorn held up a clenched fist, the signal to hold position and stay quiet. The squad froze, listening. Only silence. No, not entirely. Marcus discerned the faint hum of ship systems on minimal power, maybe the ventilators or a reactor running on low feed, but no clatter of movement or screech of attack. Not yet. Marcus moved forward carefully, leading with his Hellgun. The corridor stretched left and right. According to the schematics they'd studied, to the left would eventually lead toward the Enginarium and Manufactorum decks. To the right, toward crew quarters and the bridge tower. Which way first? Thorn stepped in and surveyed the gore-spattered passage.
No bodies in the immediate vicinity, aside from remains,
she observed calmly. No intact corpses. She exchanged a look with Marcus. Both were thinking the same. This didn't bode well. Either survivors had removed bodies, or something else had.
"There should be a security station nearby,"
Marcus said, pulling from memory and the faint outlines his visor overlay provided.
"Starboard side, Junction 3B. We might access internal logs or camera feeds from there."
"Lead on,"
Thorn said. Forming up, they advanced to the right, towards the bridge. Sister Amara took rear guard, bolter raised. Magos Castor followed immediately behind Marcus, so he could tend to any consoles as needed. The corridor lights were dead, forcing them to rely on their own lamps. Their footfalls echoed in the oppressive hush. As they passed a pile of remains on the floor, Marcus knelt briefly to examine it. It had once been a person in a Navy ratings uniform, or what was left of one. The flesh was stripped almost entirely off the bones, which were strangely scored and pitted. He saw teeth marks. Human teeth? No, too jagged. And something else, a residue, dark greenish and tar-like, coating parts of the bones. He scraped a bit onto the tip of his combat knife. It clung stubbornly, like sap.
Inquisitor, look at this,
Marcus murmured, holding up the knife, its blade sticky with the substance. Thorn moved up beside him, bolt pistol ready, her eyes narrowing at the sight.
Report, interrogator,
she asked quietly, covering him as he examined the macabre find.
Some kind of organic matter. Possibly chemical corrosion or bile,
Marcus whispered. He didn't like saying it. He suppressed a wave of nausea that threatened to rise. Marcus had seen death in battle, torn limbs, charred bodies. But this was different. Something had devoured these people and left behind only gnawed bones and slime. The unnatural wrongness of it made his skin crawl beneath his armor. Magos Castor's mechadendrite snaked forward to scan the residue. Data scanners clicked and whirred.
Biochemical traces detected. Acidic, high presence of unknown microbial forms,
the tech priest reported. He paused, zooming in with one lens.
This resembles the aftermath of a virulent pathogen or enzymatic agent.
Biological warfare?
Corporal Red whispered, sounding alarmed.
Could be,
Marcus muttered, but he had doubts. Warzone bioweapons usually killed and left bodies, not whatever this was. And since the Great Rift had torn the galaxy open, stranger warp-borne diseases were appearing. This felt like one of those.
Let's move,
Thorn interjected, voice brooking no delay.
We need data.
They proceeded down the hall again, now keenly aware that whatever happened involved something grotesque enough to leave behind slime and bones. Marcus's heart thudded in his chest, but he forced himself to focus on the mission. The security station was just ahead, a small antechamber with armored glass windows, now shattered, where ship's armsmen would have monitored this quadrant. A heavy plasteel door to the station was ajar, dented outward by some impact. Beck swung his flamer to cover the opening while Marcus and Red approached. Red yanked the door wider with a grunt of effort, its gears whining in protest. Inside was a scene of carnage. The narrow room contained banks of pick screens and cogitators for internal surveillance. Chairs were overturned, and the remains of 2 armsmen were present. One lay face down by the door, back armor torn open and spine missing. The other, half of the other hung from the ceiling, stuck there by some hardened mucus. His lower body was nowhere to be seen. The upper half had a look of utter terror frozen on a bloodless face. Sister Amara murmured a prayer under her breath, signing the aquila across her chest. Psyker Simeon gagged and turned away, covering his mouth as he fought down a wretch.
Inquisitor.
Marcus motioned Thorn's attention to the grisly half-corpse suspended above.
This is more than mutiny or panic. This is something else.
Thorn's augmetic eye whirred as she zoomed in on the corpse and the strange secretion gluing it to the ceiling. She gave a grim nod.
Indeed. Let's see if we can get any logs. Magos.
Castor was already shuffling to a cogitator terminal, brushing crusted blood off the console. He interfaced with a data spike.
Power cell low. Attempting to initialize machine spirit. Negotiating protocols.
He droned. As he worked, Marcus looked over the pick screens that weren't shattered. Most were dark, but 1 or 2 flickered with static-laden images. One monitor showed what looked like a cargo bay, littered with debris. Another displayed an angle of what might be a chapel. Marcus recognized an altar, but the feed was fuzzy and kept cutting out. Suddenly, one screen flashed to life clearly for a second. It displayed a hallway intersection somewhere on the ship. In that fleeting moment, Marcus thought he saw movement, just a swaying shadow or a shifting shape, before it winked back to black. He wasn't certain, but it set him on edge.
Something might still be moving,
he said to the others, pointing at the screen.
Hard to tell, but stay sharp.
Corporal Red muttered.
I don't doubt it. Throne. What could do this?
She nudged the half-chest of the armsman on the floor with her boot. It made a squelching sound as more viscera oozed out. Red grimaced but held firm. Magos Castor gave a burst of binary chatter that approximated satisfaction.
Accessing logs now, bringing up last recorded security Vox transmissions and visual Auspex records,
he announced. A nearby speaker built into the station crackled, then a cacophony of screams and gunfire burst from it, startling everyone. Castor adjusted a dial, and the sound resolved slightly.
They're coming through! Hold the line! Hood!
A man's voice yelled, frantic.
Brother, help me! Ah!
Another voice screamed before cutting off wetly.
Seal bulkhead 12. Seal thrown... What is that?
A panicked shout. Gunshots, roaring sounds, and something that could have been an inhuman shriek overlapped in the recording. The audio devolved into a chaos of shouts and noises.
Burn them! Burn them!
Someone was yelling.
Mayday! Mayday! If anyone can hear, the warp! It's the warp!
Crackled another voice.
No! Get it off me!
Shrieked someone else, before dissolving into choking gurgles. Marcus clenched his jaw as the chaotic sounds washed over them. The stormtroopers shifted uneasily. Even Sister Amara seemed to stiffen, her posture radiating pious anger, struggling against fear. Psyker Simeon whimpered and clapped his hands over his ears, his eyes screwed shut. Then a clearer voice, authoritative despite an edge of desperation, cut through the din.
All survivors, fall back to the upper decks. This is Captain Arthas. We initiate contingency exodus. Repeat, all surviving crew to the bridge. We cannot hold the lower levels. The Emperor protects.
In the background of that transmission, a deep, guttural roar rattled the speakers, followed by what sounded like the whooshing roar of a flamethrower unleashed. That was the last coherent log entry. The playback ended in static and a faint echo of something like guttural laughter, or perhaps growling. It was hard to tell. Silence reclaimed the station.
So the crew was overwhelmed.
Marcus summarized quietly, breaking the hush.
They fell back towards the bridge, apparently.
Contingency exodus likely means they plan to abandon ship or barricade themselves.
Sister Amara added, voice grim and reverent.
Emperor have mercy on them.
Psyker Simeon, sweat now dripping down his temples, spoke up in a trembling whisper.
There is a presence still. I can feel echoes of it. Suffering, fear, and something foul permeating the very metal.
He opened his milky eyes wide, staring at nothing.
This ship is cursed.
Steady, Simeon,
Thorne said sharply, but not unkindly.
We know there's corruption here. Your role is to warn us of any immediate warp threat. Can you sense any specific location or concentration?
Simeon closed his eyes and concentrated, lips moving in a silent invocation. The others exchanged glances, unease plain on all their faces at the Psyker's pronouncement. After a moment, the Psyker raised a quivering arm and pointed downward and aft, roughly the direction of the engine sections they'd bypassed.
Below, an epicenter of rot, like a hole into the warp itself,
he whispered. Then he turned and pointed forward toward the bow.
And ahead, pain, despair, survivors, or their shades, I cannot tell.
He shuddered and rubbed his temples.
The warp taint is heavy, but strangely quiescent at the moment, like a calm in a plague storm, but it watches us.
Marcus felt a chill at those words, a calm before the storm, and the storm itself was aware of them. Inquisitor Thorne considered Simeon's reading.
The engine section is likely where this began. Perhaps where the Gellar field failed or whatever incursion happened,
she said.
But if any survivors made it to the bridge, we might find clues or living witnesses there. Also, the ship's logs at the bridge will tell us what happened.
She looked to Marcus.
What do you advise, Interrogator? Split or stay together?
Marcus was a bit surprised she asked him in front of the others, perhaps a test. He glanced down the dark corridor they'd come from, then toward the passage leading to the bridge tower. Splitting up now would be risky. They'd be easier prey separately, and they'd already seen evidence of multiple threats.
Stick together for now, my lady,
he replied decisively.
We push toward the bridge first. If survivors or the main cogitator logs are there, that gives us intel and possibly allies. Then we can decide whether to delve into the bowels of the ship to neutralize the source.
Thorn nodded approvingly.
Agreed. The warp drive and Gellar field sections can be dealt with once we gather more information.
She turned to Castor.
Margos, pull any map, data, or schematics you can from this station. Note sealed bulkheads or depressurized areas.
Castor clicked and began a data download.
Yes, Inquisitor. Schematics loaded into our auspex. Many sections show unresponsive, likely power failures or structural collapse. Life support minimal, but technically operational in some zones.
Radiation or toxins detected?
Marcus asked, thinking of the foul residue they'd seen.
Auspex indicates elevated biocontaminants in the atmosphere,
Castor answered.
Air purity is very low, likely due to decay and possibly airborne pathogens.
He paused, then from a compartment on his belt, he produced a set of small injectors.
I prepared these antiviral and antitoxin doses. They may not counter unknown influences completely, but will bolster immunity.
Marcus accepted an injector. He, Thorn, Red, Beck, and Simeon all pressed the devices to their neck seals or bared arms, administering the doses with a hiss. Sister Amara declined with a slight gesture, tapping the side of her helmet's rebreather system. I will rely on the Emperor's protection and this blessed filter, she said. Marcus knew her power armor also likely incorporated enhanced antitoxin systems and chemical scrubbers. One of Castor's servo skulls, Marcus hadn't noticed it earlier, so silent it was, now drifted into the security room, its tiny optic lens flickering. Castor warbled a binary command, and the servo skull floated ahead of them down the corridor, scouting a few meters in front. They could all tie into its picked feed via their visors. The view was grainy, but it helped extend their sight beyond the reach of their flashlights. They moved out again, leaving the grim security station behind. Beck took a moment to fire his flamer into the hanging half-corpse on the ceiling, incinerating it with a whoosh.
Returning you to the Emperor,
he murmured. Marcus couldn't blame him for wanting to destroy that abomination. The stench of charred flesh mingled with the already foul air as they pressed on. Trudging forward, they followed the corridor towards the central spine of the ship, where elevators and stairwells could take them up to the command decks. Along the way, they found more signs of battle, scorch marks, more splashes and drips of blood, bullet holes perforating the walls. But still few intact bodies. A severed arm here, a heap of shredded organs there. It was as though something had feasted on the fallen or dragged parts away. Red quietly voiced what they were all thinking.
What happened to them? Why are so few whole bodies around?
Consumed or repurposed,
Sister Amara responded grimly.
Dark powers often do not permit their victims the dignity of a body to bury.
Trooper Beck swore under his breath, shaking his head.
This is like that Space Hulk tale I heard of. The twice death of St. Katrin. Whole crews vanished, turned into flesh-eating ghouls by a warp plague.
Keep conjecture minimal,
Thorn interjected, not harshly but firmly.
Do not let imagination fuel fear. Observe and report what you see.
Yes, ma'am.
Beck muttered. Marcus could see his hands trembling slightly on his flamer's grip. They reached a large junction. The map overlay on Marcus's visor identified it as a main arterial passage connecting to the central lift shafts. The servo skull's feed showed the corridor opening into a wider space ahead, perhaps an assembly hall or cargo staging area. This hall was tall, with multiple deck balconies overhead. It was also darker. the kind of space where light could get lost in the heights. Marcus felt anxiety rising, plenty of space for something to hide.
Slow and careful,
he whispered over the Vox. They stepped into the open area, spreading out slightly into a semicircle by instinct to cover all angles. The hall was littered with debris, torn cargo netting, broken barrels, an upturned loading servitor. Among the clutter were more ghastly signs, a pile of something that looked like vomit mixed with bones, dried to a crust, blackened burn patterns from what might have been a flamer. Someone had tried to cleanse this area, it seemed. Oddest of all, the walls bore patches of growth. Marcus swung his lamp toward one. Yes, at several points, the metal bulkheads were covered in a thin layer of fleshy fungus, pale and veined, like membranous film. Here and there it bulged with pustules that quivered as the team passed. Simeon whimpered softly and pressed a hand to his temple again.
They've corrupted the very ship. It's...
He didn't finish, squeezing his eyes shut as if to blot out a vision.
Eyes sharp,
Marcus hissed, feeling a prickle along his spine as he scanned the shadowy balconies above. Suddenly, Corporal Red's voice crackled over the Vox, urgent and tense.
Movement, port side balcony.
Marcus snapped his head up to the left. On the second-level walkway above, beyond a railing, something indeed skittered. He caught only a glimpse, a small silhouette ducking behind a column. It might have been man-sized or smaller. He couldn't be sure. Everyone swung weapons in that direction. Sister Amara triggered her suit's auto-senses to amplify the gloom.
Show yourself, heretic!
She barked, voice echoing through the cavernous hall. Only a faint chittering answered from somewhere in the dark heights.
Multiple heat blurs,
Castor reported, one of his lenses glowing as he scanned.
Picking up 4 entities on Auspex, moving along upper decks, circling us.
A sudden clank behind made Beck whirl around, flamer ready. Marcus pivoted, heart in throat. A metal barrel they'd passed had just toppled over, perhaps dislodged by something unseen skittering past.
We're surrounded,
Red muttered, her back to Marcus as they formed a tighter circle.
Steady,
Thorne said softly. Her augmetic eye glowed as she switched through vision modes, trying to pinpoint targets. A rasping sound came from the darkness overhead, like a gurgling hiss. Then a pattering of many feet across metal. They were on the ceiling, or in the vents, or both.
Fire!
Marcus ordered, squeezing the trigger of his hellgun as his lamp caught a vague shape scuttling above. Coherent blue beams lanced out, briefly illuminating a hunched form clinging to the rafters. It looked vaguely humanoid, but with too many limbs, and eyes that shone like amber in the brief flash. The hall erupted in weapons fire. Red unleashed a boom of buckshot at another darting blur. Sister Amara fired a bolter round that detonated with a flash and puff of smoke, momentarily revealing a creature that looked like a misshapen, child-sized maggot with spindly mechanical limbs. The creatures, whatever they were, scurried with unnerving speed. One dropped down behind a stack of crates with a wet thump. Trooper Beck did not hesitate. He swept the area with a wash of fire. Prometheum flames whooshed out, engulfing the crates in cleansing fire. A shrill screech rang out as at least one target was caught in the sudden blaze. The smell of burning meat and acrid chemicals filled the air.
There!
Amara voxed sharply. She fired again into the rafters. Marcus caught sight of 2 more of the small horrors darting along the far wall, avoiding the flames. These ones he saw clearly. They were like plague-ridden rodents the size of scabrous hounds, but with far too many eyes and patchwork metal plates grafted into their bodies. One had what appeared to be a small human hand instead of a forepaw, scrabbling unnaturally along the wall. Marcus and Red fired in concert at that one, blasting chunks off the creature with disciplined shots. It fell in a spasm, squealing. The last of the initial 4 gave a chittering cry and fled up into an overhead vent grill, vanishing into the ductwork.
Cease fire,
Thorn signaled, and they all took a moment to listen, weapons still raised. Only the crackling of Beck's lingering flames and the clang of a loosened railing echoed back.
Is that all of them?
Beck asked, breathing hard inside his rebreather.
Likely just scouts or carrion feeders,
Thorn said, disgust evident in her tone. She strode toward one of the creatures they'd shot down from the wall. It was a twisted amalgam of fleshy pestilence and mechanical implants, perhaps once a common ship rat, now mutated beyond recognition. She prodded it with her boot.
Warp-spawned filth.
Magos Castor examined another that still twitched, impaled on a piece of shrapnel from Sister Amara's bolter explosion. He extended a syringe-tipped mechadendrite to take a sample, stabbing into its oozing flesh. The thing had a lamprey-like circular maw full of needle teeth, snapping weakly as Castor withdrew fluid. The Magos then calmly crushed its skull under a metal foot.
That might have been what devoured the bodies,
Marcus said, stepping back and breathing a bit easier now.
They act like vermin, but warp-altered.
Sister Amara recited fervently,
Though corruption reigns, we shall be the instrument of its cleansing.
Despite the steadiness of her voice, Marcus noted her heavy breathing and the subtle shake in her hands as she reloaded. Facing the unknown creatures had rattled everyone a bit.
Any bites or scratches?
Marcus asked, quickly sweeping his visor over his comrades. The beasts hadn't gotten close enough to inflict harm, thanks to their vigilance and withering fire. Thankfully, none of them seemed to have been touched.
Only the Emperor's fire got close,
Beck joked with a shaky chuckle, hefting his flamer, referring to his own Prometheum blast. He ejected the half-spent fuel canister and slammed a fresh one into place. Red kept watch on the shadowy upper balconies, loading fresh shells into her shotgun with quick, practiced motions. The threat seemingly neutralized, the team moved on, a bit more hastily now. They were eager to leave that shadow-filled hall behind. The encounter had taught them a harsh lesson. Even small threats could come out of nowhere in this place, and larger ones likely lurked deeper within. They reached the central lift shafts. As expected, the elevators were inactive. The shaft before them was dark, the lift platform stuck somewhere far above. The mag rails had no power. A nearby stairwell would have to do. It spiraled upward toward the command decks. Up they went, carefully, step by step. The stairwell was yet another scene of struggle. Scorch marks charred the walls, and smears of blood stained the steps. Halfway up to the next level, they encountered a barricade of furniture and metal crates someone had erected as a last stand. It had been torn open from the other side. Shredded fragments of navy blue uniforms lay about, but again, no whole bodies. They climbed in silence except for gear clinking and the occasional creak of an old step. In the confined stairwell, every noise made Marcus clench his jaw. It felt like they were walking up the gullet of some giant beast, deeper into its lair. Marcus found himself whispering a half-remembered litany of protection under his breath with each step. On Deck 3, near the top of the stair, the bridge tower was Deck 1, they found a sealed bulkhead blocking further ascent. It looked to have been manually welded shut. Black letters were scrawled across it in what looked like soot or burned oil. Do not open. Death awaits. The warning was written in High Gothic, stark and ominous. Corporal Red raised an eyebrow inside her helmet.
Charming,
she muttered. Inquisitor Thorn examined the seal.
The survivors tried to lock themselves away up there,
she surmised.
We could cut through, but should we?
Beck asked uncertainly, eyeing the dire warning scratched on the door.
We must,
Thorn declared.
Our goal is likely beyond. If any survivors made it, they'd be at the bridge above.
Magos Castor and Sister Amara took up positions to cover the stairwell below and above in case anything waited on either side. Marcus and Red prepared to breach the bulkhead. Marcus unslung a compact plasma cutter from his pack. a tool precisely for obstacles like this. He thumbed it on, and a tongue of blue-hot plasma arced out. He started slicing along the welded seams. Sparks cascaded, and the metal hissed and bubbled as it was slowly cleaved. Everyone remained tense, weapons trained at the door in case something unpleasant greeted them on the other side. After some labor, a section of the makeshift weld gave way. With a few solid kicks and pulls, they created an opening large enough to slip through one by one. Beyond was the continuation of the stairwell leading into Deck 2. Here, the lights were actually on, albeit flickering weakly. The smell in the air was different too. Less rotting meat, more burnt ozone and incense. Maybe the survivors had sanctified this area before the end. Faded strips of prayer parchment still clung to the bulkheads, and dark smears of blessed oil formed crude holy sigils on some door frames. It seemed the last survivors had tried desperately to hallow their final refuge. The team emerged into Deck 2 corridors, which led toward officers' quarters, the chapel, and further up to Deck 1, the bridge. Almost immediately, they noticed something encouraging. Bodies. Human bodies. Intact, lying where they fell in defensive positions. They wore improvised rebreathers and clutched weapons. These people had died fighting, but had not been dragged off or devoured. Perhaps they died later, of injuries or starvation or other causes. Marcus knelt by one such corpse, an older man in an officer's uniform, still gripping a las pistol in his stiff hand. The man had a large gash in his side, but the bleeding was strange. There was dried blood, yes, but also signs of advanced decay in the flesh, despite having been dead only a short time. However, his face looked calm, at peace, so different from the horror they'd seen below.
Maybe they died from starvation or dehydration after sealing themselves in,
Red speculated quietly, looking at another body. A woman in ecclesiarchy robes, likely the ship's confessor. She lay slumped against the wall, hands clutching an aquila and rosary beads entwined in her fingers. The confessor's eyes were closed, her face sunken but serene. Marcus saw no visible wound on her, perhaps taken by illness or despair in the end. Marcus felt a surge of sorrow and grim respect for these crew. They had held the line with faith and courage until the very end. It steeled his resolve to ensure their fate would not be in vain. Sister Amara whispered a blessing over the bodies.
They held here as long as they could,
she said softly.
Emperor, grant them rest.
Amen,
Marcus replied under his breath. It was a sobering scene. These people had tried to escape the nightmare below by sealing it out with prayer and steel. And to some extent, it worked. The corruption here was far less evident. Only faint traces of it lingered, a greenish residue near some vents, a foul undertone to the air, but nothing like the charnel foulness in the lower decks. They moved toward the bridge tower. The large armored door to the command deck antechamber was closed, but, to their surprise, not locked. It bore deep scratches on the outside, evidence that something had tried to get in. But it had held. Likely only when the survivors inside died off did any creatures manage to slip through, if at all. Thorn pressed the panel to open the final hatch. With a hiss, it obeyed. Evidently, the bridge had its own emergency power. The door slid aside, and the bridge beyond revealed itself, dimly lit by a few flickering lumen globes. The sight that met them was tragic, but not as immediately grotesque as the lower decks. A cluster of bodies, perhaps a dozen souls, were gathered near the center of the bridge, around the captain's command throne and the navigator's station. They had been laid out almost ritualistically, covered with a tattered Imperial Navy ensign. Perhaps those who were alive at the end had arranged their fallen companions with dignity. Beck exhaled, the sound crackling over the Vox.
Emperor!
He whispered in reverence. They advanced carefully among the silent consoles and empty stations. The bridge had a wide viewing bay at the front, now dark, showing only the distant stars outside. A ghostly light from those stars cast across the scene of the loyal dead. At the captain's chair, a man in a fine dress uniform sat slumped, head bowed as if in contemplation. In his hand was a bolt pistol, and a single bullet hole marked his right temple. Dried blood trailed down his cheek. He had taken his own life, likely the final act on this bridge. Inquisitor Thorn removed her helmet, clipping it to her belt, revealing a drawn, strained expression on her face. She stepped forward and gently, almost reverently, pried the bolt pistol from the captain's lifeless hand.
Captain Arthas, I presume,
she said quietly, reading the nameplate on the uniform.
He gave the abandoned ship order we heard, and in the end...
She trailed off, voice heavy with respect and sorrow. Marcus removed his own helmet as a sign of respect in this tomb of heroes. The others followed suit, except Castor, who had no true helmet. His faceplate remained on. Sister Amara took her helmet off entirely, her short white hair plastered to her forehead with sweat. She knelt and began to say a prayer for the departed, her voice low and fervent. As they paid their respects, a sudden noise made everyone start. A weak cough, then a low moan from a dark corner of the bridge. Marcus snapped his hellgun up again, eyes scanning the shadows.
Identify yourself,
Thorn called out, bolter raised. Incredibly, from behind a Voxcaster console at the edge of the bridge, a figure shifted and began to crawl forward into the dim light. It was a man, ragged and emaciated, one leg dragging uselessly. He wore the tattered remnants of a Navy medical uniform with an armband bearing the Medica symbol. Dried blood stained his sleeves and tunic.
Who?
The man croaked, voice dry as sand. They rushed over, albeit warily. The man was gaunt, eyes sunken, and skin gray. Red and Beck moved to cover the edges of the bridge out of instinct, while Marcus and Thorn knelt by the fallen survivor.
In the Emperor's name, you're safe now,
Inquisitor Thorn assured, identifying herself as she showed her Inquisitorial rosette. She placed a hand on the man's shoulder gently.
We are the Inquisition. Help has come.
The man gave a wheezing chuckle that turned into a ragged cough. His voice was weak, but laced with bitterness.
Safe. No one is safe. You shouldn't be here.
Marcus uncapped his canteen and carefully brought it to the man's cracked lips.
Easy now. You're going to be all right. What's your name and rank?
The man swallowed a little water with difficulty and blinked at them.
Medica Felpio, Chief Surgeon,
he rasped. His hollow eyes flickered to Thorn's armor and the seal. He seemed to gather a scrap of hope.
Inquisitor, you came, but too late.
What happened on this ship, Medic?
Thorn asked gently but urgently.
What caused all this?
Felpio shuddered. Tears formed in his eyes as memory overwhelmed him.
The warp, the plague,
he whispered.
It started in the lower decks. People went mad. Those still sane sealed themselves up here. We tried to hold out.
He gestured weakly at the bodies around.
The captain, Confessor Olin, Sister Famiel, they kept faith. But one by one we died, not from the creatures. They never breached our barricade, but from sickness, hunger, and despair.
His voice cracked.
It was a plague of madness and mutation. It didn't kill us outright. It toyed with us. Some of the crew changed, even locked up here. A few turned on us. We had to...
His eyes flickered to a far corner where a few bodies lay separate from the main cluster, covered with a tarp. Perhaps those were crew whom the survivors themselves had to execute when they turned. Felpio's face twisted in anguish at the memory. Psyker Simeon stepped forward, overcome by curiosity and pity.
A warp plague, indeed,
he murmured, confirming it to himself. He wiped sweat from his bald brow.
You survived all this time.
Felpio smiled bitterly, a rictus grin on his gaunt face.
Not sure I call this survival. I think the Emperor willed me to stay alive just long enough to warn someone. I prayed for deliverance, and now you're here. But truly, it's too late for me.
Marcus noticed that Felpio's left arm, from shoulder to elbow, was wrapped in filthy bandages that oozed a yellow-green discharge. An unmistakable stench of rot wafted from it. Carefully, Marcus peeled back a corner of the dressing. Beneath were hideous black sores and necrotic flesh creeping up the limb. Some kind of infection, likely warp-borne. It was already too late to save the arm, and fatal without miraculous treatment. Thorn saw it too, and her jaw tightened.
This is beyond a simple medpack cure. Warp taint,
she said grimly. Felpio coughed harshly, spitting up a little blood.
Don't waste time on me. You must destroy this ship. Destroy everything on it,
he wheezed.
We tried, but lacked the means.
He fumbled shakily inside his tattered Medicae coat and produced a data slate, holding it out with trembling fingers.
I recorded what I could, a log of events for whomever might find it. It details day by day until I was too weak to write. Take it, please.
Thorn accepted the slate with a solemn nod.
We will see it delivered to Holy Terra, if need be,
she promised.
And the knowledge used to prevent this happening again.
Felpio grimaced, a mixture of relief and pain crossing his drawn face.
Then, at least our deaths won't be for nothing.
Suddenly, Psyker Simeon stiffened, his milky eyes going wide.
Inquisitor, something changes,
he said, alarm rising in his voice. He tilted his head as if listening to some unseen signal.
The calm is passing. It knows we're here. It stirs.
Felpio's face contorted in fear.
Yes, it waits below,
he gasped.
The demon, it took the form of an angel of disease. We sealed it in the lower decks with explosives, but it didn't die, only slumbered, perhaps.
As if on cue, the lights throughout the bridge flickered. A distant echo reverberated through the hull. A low moan or roar, impossible to tell which.
The warp is boiling,
Simeon said, his voice thready with panic.
I sense a great hate, hungry and aware of us.
Marcus and the others exchanged alarmed glances. It seemed their already limited time was running out. Thorn stood abruptly, making a quick decision.
We have the log. Now we must finish the mission,
she said, voice firm.
We need to destroy this vessel and whatever abomination holds it.
We have charges to rig, or we could try overloading the reactor,
Magos Castor offered, already thinking ahead as always. Suddenly, Felpio grabbed Thorn's forearm with surprising strength for a dying man. His eyes burned with urgency.
There's an auxiliary reactor below the Medicae deck,
he rasped.
We were going to detonate it, but the creatures attacked before we could finish, so set it off and it'll chain react with the warp drive.
He convulsed in a fit of coughing, the effort almost too much. With one last burst of will, he managed to add,
That will send this accursed ship straight to hell.
Thorn squeezed his hand gently.
Thank you, Medicae. Your Emperor-given knowledge will be used,
she promised. Felpio managed the faintest shadow of a nod. A peacefulness seemed to come over him. His eyes rolled back, and his grasp on Thorn's arm slackened as he went limp. Marcus checked the man's neck for a pulse, but found nothing. Medicae Felpio had held on until delivering his warning, then passed away as if the Emperor had granted him permission to rest. Marcus gently closed Felpio's staring eyes and laid him back against the base of the Vox console, granting the weary man a final measure of dignity. A solemn silence held for a second as they bowed their heads. Then the entire ship shuddered violently. The lumen strips blinked, dimmed, then returned to their weak glow.
That feeling,
Sister Amara said quietly, getting back to her feet and warily scanning around the bridge, bolter raised.
Something is coming.
Indeed, Marcus felt it too, a pressure in the air, like the electric heaviness before a thunderstorm. His heart rate spiked, fresh adrenaline flooding his system.
Magos, mark that auxiliary reactor's location on our schematic,
Thorn ordered briskly.
Simeon, steel yourself. We may face a greater demon. Sister Amara, prepare any sacred wards you carry.
Sister Amara drew a small vial of holy water from a belt pouch. Quickly, she sprinkled consecrated droplets over her bolter and across the threshold of the bridge, murmuring a fervent blessing. She then began chanting the litany of protection under her breath. Beck and Red exchanged a look and began swapping in fresh ammunition, Beck checking the pilot light on his flamer and Red feeding new shells into her shotgun's drum. Marcus unslung the satchel of melta-bombs from his back. They had a few high-yield charges meant for scuttling a derelict if necessary. These would do nicely on that auxiliary reactor. The plan formed quickly among them. Go back down to the medici deck, likely 1 or 2 levels below them, rig the auxiliary reactor with charges, or overload it, as Felpio suggested, then get off the ship before it blew. Ideally, retreat all the way back to their shuttle, if possible. But if the demon awakened fully, they might have to fight it to buy themselves time to escape.
Priority is to cripple the ship,
Thorne said.
Exterminators from our support craft remains backup if we fail, or once we're clear.
She didn't need to elaborate. That calling in that strike while still on board was a last resort. Simeon swallowed hard.
If it's truly a greater demon, Emperor, preserve us. We're just a handful.
We have the Emperor on our side,
Thorne stated fiercely, cutting off his doubt.
And knowledge is power. I suspect it remains near where it manifested, down in the engine room. We'll avoid direct confrontation if possible, but be ready for anything.
They moved out of the bridge, leaving the dead to their peace. Thorne took a moment to gently shut the heavy bridge door behind them, muttering a quiet litany of rest for the fallen on the other side. Back in the corridors of Deck 2, the atmosphere felt heavier than before, as if an invisible weight pressed on them. The air itself had taken on a strange, humid warmth, and Simeon murmured that he could see the very veil of reality thinning, its edges crawling with unlight. They hurried, retracing their path to the stairwell. This time they were descending, which was somehow even harder on the psyche. They were heading back down into hell rather than away from it. The flickering emergency lights gave everything a disorienting strobe effect. A few times Marcus thought he saw figures at the edges of his vision, but it was just his mind pairing the flickers with the corpses lying about. They passed through the plasma-cut hole in the bulkhead again, squeezing by the torn barricade on the stairs. A noise from below stopped them cold, a distant clanking, and a guttural howl echoing up from the depths they'd come from. It reverberated up the metal stairwell like a monstrous moan. Beck's face glistened with sweat inside his helmet.
That didn't sound small.
It knows where we are,
Simeon whimpered, almost hyperventilating now. They moved quickly but carefully down the spiral steps. At the bottom of the stair, Deck 4 by their count, the layout matched what they'd expect for the Medicae deck and adjacent chapel. According to Castor's downloaded schematics, the auxiliary reactor was near the Medicae bay, likely to power critical systems in emergencies, perhaps directly under it in a subdeck. They entered the Medicae deck. Its hatch creaked open to a scene reminiscent of a field hospital turned charnel house. Beds and stretchers were strewn about, overturned and broken. IV stands lay toppled. Rust-brown blood was splashed everywhere, long dried. What caught their eye most was a large, jagged hole in the floor near the center of the chamber, the edges melted and corroded. A makeshift pit descending to the lower decks. Perhaps it had been blown open by an explosion or corroded by powerful acid. It was easily large enough for a man, or something larger, to drop through. From that black pit wafted a stench that outdid any they had encountered before, a concentrated miasma of rot and warp energy combined. Everyone instinctively recoiled or gagged. Simeon outright fell to his knees, clamping his hands over his ears and shutting his eyes.
It's here. It's so close,
he moaned. A rumbling laugh emanated from the darkness below, as if responding to their presence. The very deck vibrated with it.
Spread out, firing line.
Marcus barked over the Vox, raising his hell gun and motioning the others into positions. They formed a half-circle facing the gaping hole. Sister Amara stepped to the forefront with Marcus, Red, and Beck flanking them on either side. Thorn hung slightly back, chanting something under her breath as she holstered her pistol and drew forth a silver amulet from beneath her collar, a hexagrammatic ward etched with holy sigils, faintly glowing. Castor hovered near a wall console, presumably where the reactor controls were, but he kept a mechadendrite-mounted las pistol aimed toward the pit as well. For a long moment, nothing happened. Only the foul stench intensified, and a distant sloshing noise echoed up from the hole. Then it emerged. First, a massive clawed hand, slick and pallid, reached up and grabbed the edge of the hole. It looked terribly familiar, as seen by Galen Korl in the Enginarium, though of course Marcus and his team did not know that. The same hand now hauled at the deck plating, swollen greenish flesh stretched over bone and metal alike. Ragged cables hung from it like torn ligaments. Another equally grotesque hand followed, pushing aside debris. And then rose the head and bulk of the great demon of Nurgle. Marcus had faced chaos cultists, even minor demons in his time. But this was beyond any nightmare. It had to hunch to fit under the Medicae Bay's 10-meter ceiling, but even stooped it was immense, easily 4 meters tall. Its body was a mountain of putrescent flesh, pocked with suppurating boils and rivulets of black pus. Tattered remains of Mechanicus components and perhaps human body parts were embedded in its hide. Marcus caught sight of half of a human face, eyes still moving, moaning within the creature's belly folds before it sank beneath a crawling carpet of maggots. The demon's visage was hideously jovial, a skull-like grin splitting a bloated face, dozens of beady eyes swirling randomly across its surface, and from its mouth lolled a distended tongue that writhed like a tentacle of its own. With a wet thump, the massive plague demon planted one ulcerated foot onto the Medici deck and hauled itself fully out of the pit, glaring at the intruders. Corporal Red unconsciously began reciting the litany of faith under her breath in a panicked mutter, and Trooper Beck let out a soft whine, though he kept his flamer trained forward. Sister Amara shouted a battle cry to rally them, voicing a fragment of a hymn.
In the Emperor's name.
The demon wheezed a laugh at that. When it spoke, its voice was multitonal, a nauseating chorus of overlapping pitches that resonated in their chests. It was the same voice they'd heard recorded in the logs.
Mortals, little flies come to dance in Grandfather's garden. Welcome, welcome.
It spread its arms wide, mockingly, and viscous fluid dripped from open sores, splattering to the floor.
Open fire!
Thorn commanded, raising her bolt pistol and letting off a trio of shots. They unleashed everything. Marcus strafed side to side with his hellgun, sending lances of superheated energy into the monster. Smoking holes were burned into its bulk, but it barely seemed to notice. Sister Amara fired a disciplined burst of bolter shells. The explosive rounds detonated across the creature's midsection, blowing gory chunks of putrid flesh loose, but the demon merely shuddered and then let out a gurgling chuckle. Beck sprayed a continuous jet of flaming promethium over its left side. That finally earned a reaction. The demon bellowed as unnatural flame clung to its hide, blackening and bubbling warty flesh. It recoiled a step, great arms flailing at the searing fire. For a heartbeat, hope stirred in Marcus. It could be hurt, but then it retaliated. The thing's maw yawned wide and it belched forth a cloud of filth, a noxious green miasma that billowed toward them like a plague wind.
Cover,
Marcus shouted. He dove behind an overturned Medici bed. Beck and Red likewise threw themselves behind a heavy metal operating table that had been bolted to the floor. Sister Amara, caught in the open and unwilling to turn her back on the foe, trusted her power armor's seals and simply braced herself, firing into the cloud even as it washed over her. Her armor sizzled as the corrosive mist settled on it, droplets of vile spittle eating into ceramite. Wherever the toxic fog touched exposed materials, it corroded instantly with a vicious hiss. The floor plating bubbled and turned to sludge. The scattered corpses on the floor fared worse, half liquefying as the warp plague vapor broke them down. Had the team not taken cover or worn sealed armor, that could have been them melting into slurry. Psyker Simeon, still collapsed on the floor, raised a shaking hand and let out a desperate cry. Untrained soldiers would think him mad, but Marcus recognized the telltale aura of psychic power. In a surge of invisible force, Simeon unleashed a telekinetic shockwave at the demon. The air crackled as the push slammed into the great creature. To Marcus's amazement, the bloated giant actually staggered back 2 steps, a spray of surgical tools and debris from the floor hurtling up to stab into its hide. The demon roared, more in annoyance than true pain, but it was something. The plague fiend flicked a massive clawed hand outward, as if shaking off water. From an open sore on its forearm, a swarm of tiny chittering demons, no larger than rats, spilled forth, flung in all directions. These were Nurglings, perhaps, or some similar warp-spawned imps, giggling maliciously as they bounded toward the team. The little monstrosities leapt and cackled. Red, rising partly from cover, blasted 2 out of the air with 1 sweep of her shotgun. The tiny bodies exploded in splashes of caustic goo. Beck swung his flamer downward and immolated a half-dozen in 1 great sweep of fire, their high-pitched squeals dying to gurgles. One of the creatures managed to evade the flames and latch onto Sister Amara's back, gnawing at a power cable on her armor. With a snarl of disgust, Amara slammed herself against the wall, crushing the imp between unyielding ceramite plate and steel bulkhead. It burst in a shower of stinking ichor. Marcus crushed another under his boot as it scuttled toward him, feeling it pop and coat the floor in hissing slime that began to eat into his boot sole. He ignored the burn and kept firing burst after burst at the main demon whenever he had a window, trying to draw its ire. The demon indeed turned its many-eyed gaze on the psyker who had dared to hurt it. With alarming speed for something so large, it lunged forward, whipping out a sinuous tentacle-like appendage from its torso. The slimy tendril coiled around Simeon's waist and lifted him off the ground. Simeon screamed in pure terror as the demon dangled him in the air.
Little witch fly, such a sweet morsel.
The monster gurgled, squeezing. Simeon's scream cut off in a choking gasp as the air and blood was crushed from his lungs, pink froth appearing on his lips.
Help!
Simeon shrieked over the Vox link, though his actual voice had no air behind it. His limbs flailed, blood bubbling from his mouth as that unholy tentacle constricted his ribs. With a roar of righteous fury, Sister Amara charged. She drew a long, mono-edged combat knife from her side, its blade crackling with a faint blue power field, sanctified and energized.
Unclean spawn, face the Emperor's wrath,
she cried out, leaping and slashing down on the tendril holding Simeon. The blessed blade bit deep. Viscous green ichor spurted from the tentacle in a shower as Amara sliced through half its thickness. The demon bellowed in genuine pain this time, the severed portion of the tendril falling limp and releasing Simeon. The psyker fell to the floor in a heap, gasping and coughing wetly. Amara did not relent. Snarling a prayer, she emptied the remainder of her bolter's magazine, point blank, into the gushing wound she'd opened. Rotten flesh blew apart in bursts. The towering abomination reared back, then swung an arm as thick as a tree trunk at her. The backhand strike caught Sister Amara across her chest plate like a speeding ground car. She was lifted off her feet and hurled across the medici chamber. With a crash, she smashed through a plexiglass partition separating an operating area, shattering it. She hit the ground and lay still amid the ruins of glass and plasteel, her bolter spinning away. The blow had dented her breastplate inward. She did not stir. Marcus felt a spike of fear and rage at seeing the sister go down. She had been the bravest of them, and now she might be dead or dying. He staggered up from behind the bed he'd used as cover, intent on rushing to Amara's side, but Inquisitor Thorn grabbed his arm fiercely. Through his ringing ears, he heard her shout,
"No time. Go!"
There was heartbreaking anguish in her voice, but also cold command. Marcus realized in that moment, with cold despair, that there was nothing they could do for Amara now. The path to the exit, back toward the stairwell, lay almost clear. The demon had lurched a few steps away, momentarily disoriented by pain and fury. They had to run now, or none of them would get out.
"Charges set. We have to go now,"
Marcus voxed, hoping the others heard him through the chaos. By his estimate, Castor's remote overload and his melt-a-bombs were likely already counting down. Thorn heard and acknowledged, falling back toward the Medici room's exit hatch. Castor scuttled after her, extending a mechadendrite to latch onto the injured psyker Simeon and drag him along the floor. The demon, though wounded in a dozen places, was far from finished. It understood their intent on some level. It howled,
"No escape. All die with me,"
in that horrible chorus voice. Then, to their horror, it began to charge, using its bulk like a battering ram to simply overrun them and block their way out. Sister Amara, with the very last of her strength, got to her hands and knees directly in the demon's path.
"For the Emperor!"
she whispered. Then she triggered her jump pack, damaged but still functional, to launch herself like a human projectile at the monster's face. The demon reflexively swatted at the object hurtling toward it. It caught Amara in midair and hurled her aside again, like a bothersome insect. The sister's broken body smashed against a steel pillar and fell limp, this time not moving at all. But her sacrifice gave the others a split-second opening. The demon's rush had been diverted to swatting her, leaving a gap near the doorway.
"The path is clear. Go, go,"
Thorn ordered, voice tight with grief and urgency. Marcus lurched toward the fallen psyker. Simeon was barely conscious, blood dribbling from his lips, but alive. Marcus hooked his arms under Simeon's and heaved.
"Come on,"
he urged, half dragging, half carrying the slender man toward the hatch. The demon recovered from Amara's final distraction and resumed its charge, slamming into the doorway just as Castor and Thorn reached it. The creature wedged its bulk partly through, roaring and flailing its gangly arms to block the exit entirely. Thorn unleashed her final trump card. She brandished the glowing hexagrammic amulet she had been chanting over.
"Be gone!"
she cried, shouting a secret name of the Emperor. With a swift motion, she hurled the amulet at the demon. The little talisman struck the plague beast square in the chest and erupted in a flash of golden light. The holy energy rippled like a miniature sunburst. The demon shrieked as its flesh seared, the sigils of banishment burning into it like acid. A wreath of luminous fire clung to the creature, and smoke sizzled from its many wounds. The blast made it recoil, sliding back from the doorway with an agonized bellow. For an instant, the passage was clear.
"Go! Go!"
Thorn shouted. Marcus, practically hauling Simeon, sprinted through the gap beneath the thrashing demon, ducking under a swing of its massive claw that nearly took his head off. Beck came right behind, Red's unconscious form thrown over his shoulder in a fireman's carry. The young trooper's face was set in grim determination as he barreled past the howling beast. Magos Castor skittered through next, one of his spindly mechadendrites getting caught and torn off by a swipe of the demon's claws. Sparks flew from the severed limb, but Castor made it through the hatchway uninjured. Thorn was last. She deftly rolled under the demon's reaching talons as it lunged for her. The creature managed to rake her back with the tips of its claws, screeching in triumph, but it was only a glancing hit across her armor. It gouged deep furrows in the carapace, but did not penetrate to flesh. Thorn winced at the impact, but kept moving, diving through the hatch. They all squeezed out into the corridor beyond. Behind them, the plague demon roared in fury, wedged momentarily in the doorway of the medici chamber. It could undoubtedly force its bulk through given time, but for the moment it was stuck and thrashing behind them. No time to finish it off. They had only minutes, perhaps less, before Castor's reactor overload and Marcus's charges went critical. Beck spun and hosed a final burst of flame back at the doorway to discourage immediate pursuit. The promethium bloomed, and the demon bellowed as fresh fire washed over its face. Without waiting to see more, Beck turned and ran after the rest of the team, still carrying Red, who was moaning faintly, alive by the Emperor's grace. They ran, stumbling, exhausted, wounded but alive, through the quaking corridors. The deck trembled underfoot as distant explosions and system failures began to cascade. The overloaded reactor was approaching the point of no return. Alarm klaxons whooped a final mournful warning throughout the doomed ship. Castor's Vox gear clicked and a flat machine voice began intoning,
"Reactor critical, T-minus 3 minutes to core breach,"
in high Gothic.
"Move, move,"
Marcus urged, half dragging Simeon along. The survivors stumbled through the flickering passageways they'd come down earlier. The gentle red emergency lights now flashed angrily, and scraps of luminous fungus overhead cast grotesque shadows that danced with each tremor of the hull. Bulkheads groaned as the Sanctum Imperator prepared to breathe its last. They rounded the final corner leading to the airlock where the shuttle spectral still waited, maglocked to the hull. Marcus's heart leapt to see the shuttle's running lights through the open inner hatch. Their exit was still there. He slammed the external release panel with an open palm. Miraculously, power still flowed here. The airlock's inner door parted. One by one, they hauled themselves through, practically throwing the injured ahead of them into the shuttle's confines.
"Detach, now!"
Marcus shouted toward the shuttle's cockpit as he and Thorn staggered inside last. The servitor pilot needed no further orders. The moment the airlock cycled shut behind the last of them, the shuttle's docking clamps released with a thud. With a jolt of maneuvering thrusters, the Spectral pushed away from the Sanctum Imperator. Through a small porthole, Marcus watched as the mighty warship turned charnel house met its end. The auxiliary reactor that Felpio had directed them to finally went fully critical. A lance of blinding light speared out from the ship's midsection. Heartbeats later, a chain of secondary explosions rippled the length of the vessel, blossoming into a billowing sphere of fire that tore the Sanctum Imperator apart from within. Chunks of armored hull plating, each hundreds of tons, sheared away like autumn leaves in a storm wind. In the heart of that hellish inferno, Marcus imagined the warp-tainted abomination that had hunted them being vaporized, howling in rage until it was utterly consumed. The Spectral bucked as the blast wave from the dying frigate caught up with them. Proximity alarms blared. The shuttle was hurled forward by the shock. Inertial dampeners strained. Marcus was thrown hard against a bulkhead, and for a moment stars danced in his vision, but the little craft held together. Moments later, they were clear, hurtling away from an expanding cloud of debris that had once been a proud Imperial ship. Inside the shuttle's cabin, there was only ragged breathing and stunned silence. They had escaped. They were alive. Marcus slumped into a crash seat, chest heaving, sweat pouring down his face inside his helmet. He couldn't quite believe it was over. Beck gently laid Red on the deck, propping her head on a roll of cloth. He removed his helmet and drew deep, shaking breaths. Red was alive, though unconscious, and he busied himself applying a coagulant to the nasty acid burn on her arm. Magos Castor collapsed onto a bench, the lenses of his optics going dark as he powered them down to conserve energy. One mechadendrite dangled, sparking, sheared off at the midpoint. Castor regarded the sparking end distantly, as if only now processing that loss. Simeon was coughing wetly. Marcus, regaining some strength, helped the psyker to a seat and tilted his head back.
Easy. Breathe,
Marcus said. Simeon nodded weakly, each breath a painful rasp. He would live. The demon's coil hadn't crushed him fully, thanks to Amara. A heavy weight settled on Marcus's soul. Sister Amara? The thought that she hadn't made it finally hit him fully. He closed his eyes. Emperor, grant her soul peace. She had died so they could escape. Inquisitor Thorn stood in the center of the shuttle bay, helmet off, staring out a small round viewport at the rapidly receding fireball. The orange reflection danced in her augmetic eye. Marcus could see her shoulders rising and falling as she struggled with emotions. After a moment, she turned away from the view and looked at the survivors assembled. Marcus, Castor, Beck, cradling Red, Simeon. So few left. Thorn bowed her head.
The Emperor protects,
she said quietly, completing the ancient refrain. Marcus, exhausted beyond measure, managed to respond,
"And we are his servants."
His voice was hoarse and thick with grief. They had paid a high price, but they had accomplished the mission. He looked around at the battered, bloodied survivors in the shuttle. They were alive, yes. Changed, certainly. Scarred in more ways than one. But alive. For now, that was miracle enough. Hours later, aboard the Inquisitorial support cruiser, Mercy of St. Catherine, Marcus found himself lying on a Medicae cot, staring at a brightly lit, sterile ceiling. The events aboard the ghost ship played over and over behind his closed eyelids. The shrieks of the dying, the daemon's grotesque grin, Sister Amara's final courageous stand. He opened his eyes with a shudder, banishing the visions. The Medicae bay around him was quiet, save for the soft beeps of monitors and the hiss of an oxygen recycler. His left arm throbbed dully despite the numbing agents. He turned his head to see it swathed in purification bandages. The ship's chirurgeons had done what they could, but warp-tainted fluids had ravaged the flesh. Even now, holy unguents soaked the dressings in hopes of saving the limb, though Marcus suspected amputation and an augmetic replacement awaited him. The thought hardly bothered him at the moment. He was alive, and that was miracle enough. A gentle clink of metal on metal announced Inquisitor Thorn's approach. She stepped up to his bedside, her own wounds cleaned and bound. She had shed her shattered breastplate, and now wore a simple black fatigue robe. Even so, Marcus could see fresh bandages beneath it on her back where the demon's claws had scored her. She managed a faint smile.
"How do you feel, Interrogator?"
she asked softly. Marcus tried to push himself a bit more upright, grimacing at the dull ache radiating through his bruised ribs.
"I've been better, my lady,"
he rasped, voice still raw from smoke and stress. He glanced around the bay. On adjacent cots, Corporal Red lay in a regenerative coma, and 4-line feeding into her arm. Trooper Beck sat on a low stool beside her, out of his armor now, head nodding in an exhausted doze as he kept vigil. Magos Castor was nowhere to be seen, likely already in the tech sanctum, communing with the ship's Mechanicus contingent to analyze the data slate. Simeon lay in a cot in the corner, eyes closed, lips murmuring the Emperor's prayer even in uneasy sleep.
"You saved us,"
Thorn said quietly, drawing Marcus's attention back. Her single augmetic eye whirred as it refocused on him.
"Your quick action with the reactor and your bravery facing that thing gave us a chance. Emperor knows you performed beyond expectations."
Marcus felt heat rise to his cheeks at the praise.
"We all did our duty, Inquisitor. If not for Sister Amara and the others."
His voice caught and he looked down, the memory of Amara being struck down flashing through his mind.
"So many lost."
Thorn's expression grew distant, haunted.
"Yes, Amara, Felpio, and countless others.
She placed a gloved hand gently on his uninjured shoulder.
Their sacrifice will be remembered.
Her tone was steely, yet Marcus could hear the sorrow underlying it.
Your report will ensure that. I trust you to write it fully. Include every act of valor.
Marcus swallowed the tight lump in his throat and nodded.
Of course.
He hesitated, then added,
Medici Felpio gave us a data slate. Logs of what happened. Castor is analyzing it now.
The Inquisitor's jaw tightened.
When you're able, review it,
she said.
We'll cross-reference with your own account before we submit everything to the Ordo archives.
She paused and her voice gentled.
Rest now, Marcus. That's an order. There is much ahead of us, but it can wait a few hours.
Yes, ma'am,
Marcus murmured. He suddenly realized how heavy his limbs felt, as if the grav plating had been dialed up. The adrenaline of battle had long since worn off, leaving exhaustion and grief in its wake. As Thorn moved off to quietly speak with a Medicae about Red's condition, Marcus let his eyes drift shut. In moments, despite the images of horror still dancing at the edge of his mind, he slipped into a deep, merciful sleep. Some weeks later, interrogator Marcus Greem stood in a quiet cloister garden aboard the cruiser as it translated through warp en route to Sector Command. The air smelled faintly of incense and growing things, a welcome change from the stench of death and corruption that still haunted his nightmares. He flexed the new augmetic fingers of his left arm, still growing accustomed to the faint whir and click of the joints. The polished metal prosthetic gleamed under the warm luminance of sun lamps. It wasn't a perfect replacement for flesh, but it was a reminder of what he'd endured, and what he'd lost. He walked along a row of potted shrubs and found Inquisitor Thorn seated on a stone bench beneath a stained glass mural depicting the God Emperor triumphing over foul heretics. She was out of her formal armor, wearing a simple gray tunic. In her hands she held a roll of vellum inscribed with neat, high Gothic script, a list of names. Marcus didn't need to ask whose names they were. He quietly sat beside her.
Captain Arthas, Confessor Oline, Sister Famiel, Enginseer Korl, Medicae Felpio, Sister Amara.
Thorn recited some of the names on the scroll, her eyes scanning line by line.
The roll of the honored dead. I requested a copy for my personal keeping.
Marcus bowed his head.
They deserve every honor we can give,
he said softly. For a long moment, the two simply sat in the gentle, artificial breeze of the garden, alone with their thoughts. Finally, Thorn rolled up the scroll and secured it with a ribbon.
Felpio's account was thorough,
she said, breaking the silence.
The plague, the nightmares, how it turned the crew against each other, even how at the end the survivors sang Emperor's hymns together in the darkness to keep their courage up.
Medicae Felpio's log, final entry.
Day 57. Only 5 of us remain on the bridge now. The candles are guttering low. Confessor Oline leads us in the litany of endurance every 6 hours to keep our spirits up. I can no longer tell if the whispers I hear are real or just in my mind. Poor Lathern put a bullet in his head this morning after he said he saw his dead wife beckoning to him from the shadows. The rest of us had to burn his body before it got back up. Emperor, forgive us for what we did to his remains, but we couldn't risk. We sealed the last bulkhead. Sister Famiel says she can hear scratching on the other side. I hear it too, scratching and laughter. Emperor, give me strength. I'm so afraid. We're reciting hymns now. It pushes the voices back a little. The captain says help will come. We hold to that. We hold to the Emperor's light. If this is to be our end, we will meet it with prayers on our lips.
Thorn's voice wavered slightly on the last lines, and Marcus realized the normally stoic Inquisitor was holding back tears.
They died with faith in their hearts,
Marcus said quietly, staring at the serene greenery around them.
If the Emperor needed proof of their devotion, he has it.
Thorn drew a slow breath and steadied herself.
The Ordo will likely classify this incident. Too dangerous for the public to ever know. But within our circles, the lessons will be learned.
She clenched her gloved hand around the scroll.
The threat was purged, thanks in no small part to you all.
She managed a small, genuine smile at him.
What's left of the Sanctum Imperator will drift as scrap until a Navy salvage crew can safely investigate. But nothing living remains on board.
Except us,
Marcus said. It wasn't boastful, more an expression of quiet wonder.
Somehow, we survived.
Changed, but alive,
Thorn agreed. She stood, rolling her shoulders as if to reset them. The faint whir of her bionic eye adjusting told Marcus she was appraising him.
And speaking of the future, we have a new assignment. There are whispers of another derelict out on the edge of the Eye of Terror. Reports not unlike those that led us to the Sanctum Imperator.
Marcus felt a chill at the prospect of stepping back into nightmare so soon. The wound on his soul was still raw, but he pushed aside his trepidation and rose to stand with her.
Whatever awaits, my lady, I'm ready.
He meant it. Fear still gnawed at the edges of his mind. The memory of rot and horror would not soon fade. But he'd faced the darkness once and lived. He would do so again as many times as duty required. Thorn reached down to a nearby planter and plucked a small white flower that had sprouted. It was a simple bloom, star-shaped with 5 delicate petals. She slipped it between the pages of her scroll.
For the fallen,
she explained softly. Then she met Marcus's gaze.
Yes, Interrogator. We will face whatever comes next, together, in his name.
As they left the tranquility of the garden, Marcus cast one last glance at the illuminated glass depiction of the Emperor, haloed in gold. He thought of Sister Amara's final cry, "In the Emperor's name," and of Medice Felpio's dying resolve to warn others. A surge of purpose filled him. The blood of martyrs, the sacrifices of heroes, would not be in vain. Clenching his new augmetic fist, Marcus stepped forward to join Inquisitor Thorn. Ahead of them, the starship's corridors stretched on, brightly lit and humming with life. The darkness they had defeated was behind them now. Whatever lay ahead, they would meet it, unafraid,